Hello and welcome. Some questions have stayed with humanity ever since we first began looking up at the sky. Is there an outside to the universe? Once cosmology began treating space and time as a single structure, that question stopped being merely philosophical and began to press directly against science itself. We are used to thinking in terms of boundaries. Inside the house, outside the house. Inside a place, outside it. But when we speak about the universe as a whole, those points of reference begin to dissolve. Intuition starts to fail, and what once seemed like a spatial boundary reveals itself to be something far deeper, tied to the way we think about reality itself. Throughout this journey, we will come to understand why the universe is defined as everything that exists, carefully explore the difference between existence and observation, and trace the delicate boundary between what science is already able to say and what still remains open. But before we continue, I need your help. If this kind of reflection speaks to you, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe so you do not miss future stories, and share it with someone who enjoys thoughtful science. That simple gesture makes a real difference and helps Cosmos for Rest continue bringing these journeys to life. Now, let yourself relax. Close your eyes and let science guide you. From the very first moments of life, the human mind learns to organize the world through simple separations. There is what is contained and what surrounds it, what belongs to a defined space and what remains beyond it. A house shelters, the street encircles. A container holds, the environment receives. These distinctions do not arise by chance. They are shaped by the direct experience of a body in motion, by the need for orientation, and by the constant search for safety and predictability. Inside and outside thus become essential mental tools for survival and for communication. Over time, these tools stop being merely practical and begin to structure language, abstract thought, and even emotion. Being inside can mean protection, belonging, identity. Being outside can suggest distance, exclusion, unfamiliarity. Even when there are no walls or physical boundaries, these words continue to operate as powerful references. They organize ideas, sustain metaphors, and help give form to complex concepts through simple experiences. This way of thinking works with remarkable efficiency in everyday life. It allows us to understand objects, environments, and social relationships. A book can be inside a backpack. A city can be outside a familiar route. These statements require little intellectual effort because they rely on a world where boundaries are clear, measurable, and shared. The geometry implied in these ideas fits well within the human scale, the scale in which the body reaches, moves around, and occupies space. Over the centuries, however, human curiosity began to extend beyond this immediate horizon. The night sky became more than a distant backdrop. It turned into an object of questioning, storytelling, and investigation. Even so, the words available to describe it were the same ones used for houses, paths, and containers. The sky seemed like a ceiling. The stars, small points fixed on a dark surface. Naturally, if there was a ceiling, there could be something beyond it. This linguistic and intuitive inheritance crossed cultures and eras. Even as more sophisticated models emerged, the idea of the universe as a vast space filled with bodies still quietly carried the notion of a larger container, something that would hold everything that exists. And if there is a container, the question of what lies outside it arises almost uninvited, not as the result of an immediate scientific need, but as a direct consequence of how the mind has been trained to think. It is important to recognize that this impulse is not a mistake. It is a natural extension of human experience. Science does not arise in opposition to everyday intuition, but from it. What changes as knowledge advances is the realization that certain conceptual tools have limited reach. Just as a map of a city does not describe an entire continent, the notions of inside and outside, so useful in daily life, begin to lose precision when applied to the cosmic whole. When this limitation goes unnoticed, intellectual discomfort emerges. The question of a possible outside of the universe begins to carry a spatial expectation that may not correspond to physical reality. Even so, it persists because it offers a sense of continuity with habitual ways of thinking. Questioning that sense requires a delicate step, accepting that not every intuitive question points to a real object. Throughout the history of thought, this kind of transition has happened many times. The idea of an absolute center of the world, for example, seemed obvious as long as everyday experience suggested stability and stillness. It took time, observation, and reflection to understand that this immediate evidence did not describe the deeper structure of reality. In a similar way, the distinction between inside and outside, so solid in familiar environments, begins to grow ambiguous when space itself becomes the subject. At this point in the journey, the goal is not yet to redefine the universe or to present definitive answers. The aim is more subtle. It is to gently prepare the conceptual ground for a shift in perspective, to recognize that certain words carry histories, habits, and expectations, and that, as we expand the scale of thought, it may be necessary to allow some of those words to become less rigid, more open, more careful. By understanding the everyday origins of the concepts of inside and outside, an inner space of flexibility begins to form. A space where the question, "Is there an outside of the universe?" can be held without urgency, without the anxiety of immediate conclusion. A space where doubt is not an obstacle, but a sign that thought is moving beyond its usual limits. This shift does not require abandoning logic or clarity. On the contrary, it simply asks for attention to the origin of our own ideas. It asks for a willingness to follow thought to the point where it begins to rely more on habit than on physical foundations. From there, the path opens toward a deeper understanding in which the universe stops being treated as one object among others and begins to be recognized as the broader context in which all objects, including the questions themselves, gain meaning. When this understanding begins to take shape, even if quietly, something changes. The notion of an outside loses the urgency it once seemed to carry, not because it has been denied, but because it starts to be seen as the product of a language shaped for a different kind of experience. And it is at this early stage that the reflection prepares to move forward, calmly and continuously, toward a broader and more careful idea of what we call the universe. As time goes on, the way human beings understand reality is shaped, almost invisibly, by the repetition of everyday actions: walking, touching, crossing a space, returning. These movements build an intimate sense of scale, an implicit notion of size, distance, and duration. The world feels understandable because it responds in predictable ways to these motions. One step leads to another place. A door separates two environments. A boundary can be crossed. All of this reinforces the idea that space is a neutral, continuous stage, always available, where objects simply occupy positions. Within this context, space appears to exist independently of the things within it. It presents itself as a permanent background, a kind of invisible container where life unfolds. This impression runs so deep that it is rarely questioned. It works too well. It allows us to plan routes, build shelters, organize cities, and tell stories. Everyday experience constantly confirms that the world is made of distinct regions, some accessible, others distant, but all belonging to the same kind of extension. From this foundation, a natural tendency emerges to apply the same reasoning to larger scales. If a room is contained within a house, and a house is contained within a city, it seems reasonable to assume that the city is contained within something larger. Thought advances through analogy, expanding the known toward the unknown. The universe, then, begins to be imagined as the largest of these regions, a kind of ultimate environment, and almost inevitably, the question arises about what surrounds it. This movement of thought is not careless. It is consistent with accumulated experience. At no point in everyday life does space present itself as something that can simply end in a conceptual sense. It may become inaccessible, distant, or unknown, but it never stops being space. So when we think about the universe as a whole, the mind tries to preserve that continuity. If there is a limit, it must separate something from something else. If there is an edge, there must be another side. Yet this extrapolation carries a silent assumption. It assumes that the rules that apply to objects within space also apply to space itself. It assumes that the universe can be treated as an item placed within a larger context, in the same way a box can be placed inside another. This assumption often goes unnoticed, because it is deeply embedded in the way language organizes thought. When we look more carefully, we realize that everyday life has never offered a direct experience of space itself, only of spatial relationships between things. We never touch space in isolation. We touch a surface, a body, a material boundary. Space appears as interval, as relation, as the possibility of movement. It is inferred, not experienced as an object. And yet the mind transforms it into something almost tangible, because that makes the immediate world easier to understand. This transformation works as long as we remain within the human scale, but it begins to show its limits when we try to apply it to the whole. The universe is not just much larger than everyday life, it is conceptually different. It is not a stage where things happen in the same way a square is a stage for encounters. It includes the very concept of a stage. That difference is subtle, but profound. By insisting on thinking about the universe using the same categories we use for ordinary objects, a quiet tension arises. The question of an outside of the universe is born from this tension. It tries to preserve familiarity, even when the subject of reflection no longer fits within familiar patterns. It is like trying to describe the entire ocean using only the experience of a glass of water. The analogy helps, but it also limits. This limit is not a failure of human thought. It is a sign of transition. Throughout history, whenever understanding expanded into new scales, it became necessary to revise basic concepts. Time was once understood as a simple, uniform sequence of moments. Matter was once seen as solid and indivisible. Each step forward required a careful distancing from immediate intuition, not rejecting it, but not fully submitting to it either. In the case of the universe, this distancing invites a more patient posture. Instead of forcing answers based on familiar images, reflection begins to open itself to the possibility that certain questions may not correspond directly to physical reality, not because they are forbidden or irrelevant, but because they were formed within a context that no longer applies. Recognizing this does not diminish curiosity, it refines it. Instead of asking only where something is, we begin to ask how the concepts we use shape what we are able to ask. Everyday experience stops being the absolute measure of the world and becomes a starting point, valuable, but limited. At this stage of the journey, the mind begins to slow its expectations. The idea of an outside of the universe no longer imposes itself with the same urgency. It begins to be observed as a construction, not as evidence. And this simple shift is enough to open space for a broader understanding, one in which the universe is no longer compared to an ordinary object, but is instead thought of as the totality within which all comparisons arise. This transition prepares the ground for an even deeper step, a step in which the very concept of space will no longer be treated as a container, but as an integral part of what we call the universe. And from there, the initial question will begin to transform, not by being answered, but by being understood in a different way. As thought moves further away from everyday experience and closer to cosmology, a quiet shift begins to take place. It is no longer just a matter of extending distances or adding more objects into a larger setting. What comes into question is the very definition of the setting itself. The universe is no longer understood as a collection of things spread out somewhere, but as the very condition that allows places, distances, and durations to exist. For a long time, even within science, space was treated as a fixed stage, indifferent to whatever happened within it. Bodies moved, interacted, collided, while space remained the same, silent and absolute. This idea was comfortable because it aligned well with everyday intuition. It preserved the sense of a permanent background, something that would exist even if nothing else did. As knowledge advanced, however, this separation began to show its limits. Gradually, it became clear that space and time were not merely passive containers. They actively participate in the dynamics of the universe. Not as independent entities, but as inseparable aspects of physical reality itself. The universe stopped being thought of as something that happens within space and time, and began to be understood as the deep interweaving of these dimensions with matter and energy. This conceptual shift has profound consequences for the question of a possible exterior. If space is part of the universe, then there is no place where the universe is located. There is no surrounding region waiting to contain it. Speaking of an outside in spatial terms assumes the existence of a larger space that holds the space of the universe. But this assumption no longer finds support in the modern description of reality. To make this idea more approachable, conceptual comparisons are sometimes used, not to provide final answers, but to illuminate the limits of thought. Imagine a surface where all possible directions are contained within itself. Within that surface, one can travel paths, measure distances, define directions, and yet there is no external region that belongs to the internal experience of that surface. The question of what exists beyond it does not find a physical point of reference from within. The value of such comparisons is not in suggesting that the universe literally behaves this way, but in showing that not every totality needs to be embedded within something larger. Some structures are complete in themselves. They do not require an outside in order to exist or to be described. The idea of an outside appears only when we try to apply categories that do not fit the nature of what is being considered. When the universe is defined as the totality of space and time, this is not an arbitrary choice of words. It reflects an understanding built from observation, modeling, and internal consistency. Everything that can, in principle, be located somewhere or sometime belongs to the universe by definition. There is no leftover space where something external could reside. This does not mean that the universe is simple, finite, or fully understood. It only means that the notion of an outside, in the usual spatial sense, loses its conceptual support. It has nowhere to anchor itself. There are no external coordinates, no vantage point beyond the whole. Any attempt to imagine such a point inevitably reuses elements that already belong to the universe itself. Recognizing this requires a certain intellectual humility. It invites the mind to accept that some questions, though natural, may not correspond to real physical entities. Just as asking what the sound of absolute silence is may not describe an observable phenomenon, asking what exists outside the universe may be pointing to a limit of language, not a limit of reality. At the same time, this perspective does not end inquiry. It refines it. Instead of searching for a spatial exterior, science turns toward other, better defined questions. How does the universe evolve? How do its properties emerge? How do space and time behave under extreme conditions? These questions remain open and deeply active, sustaining decades of research and reflection. There is also a subtle philosophical aspect here. The human mind tends to seek an external point of support, a privileged place from which to observe. But when dealing with the universe as a totality, that point disappears. The observer is always within what is being observed. There is no absolute distance possible. This is not an accidental limitation, but a fundamental feature of the human condition within the cosmos. And yet, this condition does not prevent knowledge. On the contrary, it makes it more aware of its own foundations. By recognizing that there is no outside from which the universe can be contemplated as a separate object, scientific thought becomes more precise and more careful. It learns to ask questions that respect the structure of what is being investigated. At this stage of the journey, the initial question undergoes a deeper transformation. It is no longer simply about whether something exists outside the universe, but about understanding why such a question arises and what assumptions it carries. The universe is no longer imagined as one thing among others, but recognized as the complete field in which all things, including the questions themselves, find their place. This understanding does not eliminate mystery, it relocates it. The mystery is no longer in a hidden exterior, but in the very structure of space and time, in the way the universe exists and transforms. And it is from this shift that reflection prepares to move forward, with even greater care, toward the limits of what can be observed and known. As thought approaches the limits of the universe, language itself begins to show its seams. The words we use every day were shaped to describe objects, actions, and relationships within a world of familiar scales. They carry quiet expectations about beginnings, endings, interiors, exteriors, causes, and consequences. These expectations work well as long as the subject remains close to ordinary experience. But when we turn our attention to the cosmic whole, they begin to guide thought along paths that do not always correspond to anything physical. The question of an outside of the universe is a clear example of this. It is framed with a grammar that assumes container and content, boundary and exterior. By asking what exists outside, we implicitly assume that the universe has an edge similar to that of an ordinary object. This assumption often goes unnoticed because it is embedded in the very structure of language. Words push thought in that direction before it even has the chance to examine whether the path makes sense. At this point, analogies become delicate and necessary tools. They are not meant to describe reality literally, but to shift intuition, opening space for new forms of understanding. When we compare the question of an outside of the universe to the idea of a point beyond the North Pole, the goal is not to equate physical situations, but to show how certain questions can lose meaning when they are taken beyond the system of references that gives them support. These analogies act like provisional steps. They allow the mind to move away from the habit of imagining a larger space surrounding the universe. By realizing that some directions only make sense within a specific system, it becomes easier to accept that the concept of an exterior may simply not apply to the totality of space and time. Not because something is hidden, but because there is no place for such a thing to exist. At the same time, analogies have limits. If taken too far, they can create overly concrete mental images, giving the false impression that the universe has a simple shape or an intuitive geometry. For this reason, they must be used carefully, always accompanied by the awareness that they are teaching tools, not final descriptions. Their role is to dissolve confusion, not replace it with a different one. Modern science has learned, over time, to live with this tension between language and reality. Many fundamental concepts have no direct counterpart in everyday experience, and yet, they must be communicated, discussed, and refined. To do this, language is constantly adapted, stretched, reshaped, sometimes even contradicted. New terms emerge, old ones gain more precise meanings, and some intuitions are gradually set aside. In this process, recognizing that a question may not have physical meaning is not a defeat. It is progress. It means that thought has reached a level of refinement where it no longer accepts every formulation simply because it feels natural. It begins to demand coherence with what is known about the structure of reality. Poorly formed questions are reformulated or abandoned, making room for more fertile ones. The question of an outside of the universe stands precisely at this threshold. Its value lies not so much in the answer it promises, but in the examination it provokes. By investigating it, we are led to revisit basic notions of space, boundary, and totality. This examination does not lead to an abrupt conclusion, but to a gradual expansion of understanding. There is something deeply human in this movement. Language is not merely a technical tool, it is also a reflection of how the mind organizes the world. When science indicates that certain terms no longer apply, it can generate discomfort, not because something is wrong, but because a long-standing familiarity is being questioned. Learning to remain within that discomfort, without rushing toward easy answers, is part of intellectual maturity. By accepting that not every intuitive question corresponds to a physical phenomenon, curiosity becomes more subtle. It stops seeking comforting images and begins to value conceptual precision. This does not diminish the experience of thinking about the universe. On the contrary, it deepens it, making it more honest, more open to real mystery, rather than imagined ones. At this stage of reflection, the idea of an outside of the universe no longer appears as a gap to be filled, but as a mirror reflecting the limits of language. The focus begins to shift. Instead of asking what exists beyond, we begin to ask how far our concepts can take us. And this shift prepares the way for an even more refined understanding of the boundaries between what can be observed, what can be inferred, and what remains, at least for now, beyond the reach of knowledge. It is from this distinction that the journey moves forward, calmly, toward the next step. A step in which attention turns not to an imagined exterior, but to the real horizons of observation, and to the way they shape how we speak about the universe. Even when language is carefully adjusted, the human experience of the universe remains shaped by very concrete limits. Among them, one of the most important is the reach of observation. Everything we know about the cosmos ultimately depends on the information that is able to reach us. This simple fact carries profound implications for how we think about boundaries, extension, and totality. Light, the primary messenger from distant regions of the universe, does not travel instantaneously. It carries with it a history, marked by the time it takes to cross space. As a result, When we observe increasingly distant regions, we are not only accessing faraway places, but also looking into a distant past. This feature transforms observation into a kind of temporal window, where distance and duration become intertwined. From this arises the notion of an observational horizon. There is a limit beyond which information simply has not had enough time to reach where we are. This limit is not a wall, nor a physical edge. It is a consequence of the universe's own history and the finite time available for signals to propagate. And yet, it is easy to mistake it for a real boundary, a true end of space. This confusion is understandable. In everyday life, when something cannot be reached or perceived, we tend to imagine a concrete obstacle. In the case of the universe, however, the obstacle is not spatial, but temporal. It is not something that blocks vision, but something that has not yet had the opportunity to reveal itself to us. The limit lies in the path of information, not in the structure of the cosmos. Understanding this distinction is essential to avoid misinterpretation. The existence of an observable limit does not imply the existence of an exterior. It simply means that the universe has a finite accessible history from any given point. Other regions may exist, with similar or different properties, without there being any physical separation that places them outside the universe. This idea requires a subtle adjustment of intuition. It asks us to accept that not observing something is not the same as placing it beyond an absolute boundary. It is instead a limit of current knowledge, shaped by cosmic conditions. This perspective keeps inquiry open, without forcing premature conclusions. Throughout the development of cosmology, this distinction between what is observable and what exists has become increasingly central. Theoretical models are built to describe regions that cannot be directly accessed, but that fit coherently within the broader body of knowledge. These models are not dogmatic claims, but careful extensions of what has already been confirmed. They operate at the frontier between what is known and what can be inferred. At this point, the idea of an outside of the universe loses even more of its physical grounding. What is often imagined as an exterior may, in fact, be nothing more than a region that is not observable from a particular position. There is no need to posit an outside when the very structure of space and time already explains the limits of access to information. This understanding also reinforces a certain scientific humility. Recognizing observational limits is not an admission of absolute ignorance, but an acknowledgement that knowledge advances in layers. Each layer extends our reach while revealing new frontiers. These frontiers are not final. They are always dependent on observational conditions and available instruments. There is a particular calm in this way of thinking. It allows the mind to inhabit the unknown without turning it into a threat or an artificial mystery. What is not yet observed still belongs to the universe, not to an imagined outside. It remains part of the whole, even if it cannot yet be described in detail. As this distinction settles in, curiosity begins to reorganize itself. Instead of searching for a final boundary, it turns toward the conditions that define the reach of knowledge. It asks how the universe becomes accessible, how information propagates, how time shapes what can be known. These questions keep investigation grounded in physics, without relying on unnecessary assumptions. At this stage of the journey, the universe appears less as a puzzle surrounded by borders and more as an evolving process, where understanding expands alongside the recognition of its own limits. The idea of an outside gradually dissolves, not through denial, but by losing its explanatory role. This dissolution prepares the way for an even deeper reflection, a reflection on how science deals with questions that may not have a final answer, and on the value of recognizing when the very act of asking must be transformed. It is into this terrain that the journey now continues, with care and continuity. As reflection deepens, a delicate and essential point begins to emerge. Not every question the human mind can formulate finds a definitive answer in the form of a concrete fact. This is not a failure of science, but a sign of its maturity. Science is not merely a catalogue of answers. It is also a careful method for evaluating the questions themselves. It advances not only by discovering, but by learning to distinguish between what can be physically investigated and what belongs to the realm of conceptual constructions. The question of an outside of the universe sits precisely within this intermediate territory. It arises from a legitimate curiosity, yet carries assumptions that may not align with the structure of reality as described by modern physics. Recognizing this does not end the conversation, it refines it. Finds. Science progresses when it identifies that a question must be reformulated, shifted, or even held in suspension. Throughout history, many questions once considered fundamental lost their relevance, not because they were answered, but because they became unnecessary. When it became clear that certain phenomena did not require an additional external cause, the search for that cause simply ceased to make sense. Knowledge advanced by realizing that the original question did not correspond to a real physical problem, but to an expectation inherited from earlier ways of thinking. This process requires a particular intellectual posture. It calls for patience, openness, and a willingness to live with uncertainty. Science does not offer immediate comfort, but gradual clarity. It does not promise final answers to every concern, but provides criteria for evaluating which questions are fertile and which rest on mistaken assumptions. In the case of the universe, this clarity leads to a more subtle understanding of the unknown. Instead of imagining a mysterious exterior, attention turns to the internal consistency of models, to the coherence between observation and theory, and to the well-defined limits of what can be tested. The unknown is not treated as something beyond the universe, but as something not yet integrated into the body of knowledge. There is a deeply human aspect to this stance. Accepting that we do not know everything, and perhaps never will, does not diminish the greatness of inquiry. It makes it more honest. Science is not built on absolute certainty, but on successive approximations, always open to revision. This openness is a form of strength, not weakness. When this becomes clear, our relationship with large questions begins to change. They stop being demands for immediate answers and become invitations to ongoing reflection. The question of an outside of the universe, in this light, functions like a mirror. It reveals more about the limits of human intuition than about the existence of an undescribed external reality. This shift in perspective also eases a quiet tension. There is no longer a need to fill every gap with an image or an improvised explanation. The space of not knowing becomes recognized as an integral part of scientific knowledge. It is not a void to be feared, but an open field where new ideas may emerge over time. In dealing with questions that may not have final answers, science teaches a particular kind of humility. Not a humility of resignation, but of attention. Attention to data, to concepts, to coherence, and also attention to our own cognitive limits. This attitude creates a more stable intellectual ground where curiosity can remain alive without turning into anxiety. At this point in the journey, it becomes clear that searching for an outside of the universe is not necessary for the cosmos to be profound, complex, or inspiring. The richness lies in the structure of what exists, in the way space, time, and matter are intertwined, and in the human capacity to investigate that structure with care and rigor. This understanding prepares the ground for an even broader reflection. A reflection on the relationship between the universe and humanity, on the place of human thought within this totality, and on how scientific curiosity itself becomes part of the unfolding story of the cosmos. It is toward this meeting that the journey now continues, maintaining its calm rhythm and its focus on what is essential. As reflection reaches this point, it becomes impossible to fully separate the universe from the one who questions it. The idea of an outside of the universe does not arise in a neutral void. It emerges within a human mind, shaped by history, language, culture, and by the experience of existing within a finite body. Understanding this origin does not diminish the value of the question. On the contrary, it expands its meaning by placing it within the broader relationship between humanity and the cosmos. Human beings do not occupy a position outside the universe. We do not observe from beyond, nor describe it from a privileged point outside the whole. Every attempt at understanding takes place from within, from a small region of space and time, sustained by very specific conditions. This realization does not limit knowledge, it defines its nature. To know the universe is, inevitably, a process that unfolds within the universe itself. Over time, this position has gradually been recognized. The Earth ceased to be the center, the sky ceased to be a fixed dome, and the very idea of a special place began to dissolve. Each of these shifts, required a deep adjustment in how humanity saw itself. And still, curiosity endured. Even without an external vantage point, the mind found ways to investigate, compare, infer, and understand. The idea of an outside of the universe carries, in a subtle way, a desire for absolute distance, a hypothetical place from which everything could be seen as a complete object. This desire is understandable. It reflects a search for conceptual security, for a kind of closure that organizes all things. Yet modern science suggests that such a standpoint is not part of the structure of reality. There is no position from which the universe can be observed as a finished whole from the outside. This does not make understanding impossible. It simply means that understanding happens differently. Instead of an external view, knowledge is built through internal connections. Local observations are woven into global models. Nearby phenomena help infer distant properties. The whole is understood not from a single perspective, but from a coherent network of relationships. In this process, humanity occupies a unique role, not because it stands at the center, but because it is capable of reflecting on the act of knowing itself. The question of an outside of the universe is, in part, a question about the limits of the human mind. How far thought can go using concepts shaped by local experience? To what extent language can keep up with the complexity of the cosmos? Recognizing these limits does not diminish the dignity of inquiry. It deepens it. Science becomes more aware of its own tools. It advances without the illusion of absolute completeness. There is a kind of clarity that emerges here, one that allows knowledge to grow while remaining conscious of its boundaries. There is also a quiet sense of calm in this perspective. The universe does not require total comprehension in order to exist, and humanity does not need to stand outside it to take part in it. The effort to understand the cosmos is itself an expression of the universe reflecting upon its own structure through one of its parts. When this idea begins to settle, the original question transforms, once again. It is no longer about finding an outside, but about understanding the inside in its full depth. Attention shifts from an imagined edge to the real relationships that sustain existence. Space, time, matter, and consciousness begin to be seen as interconnected aspects of a single unfolding process. This view does not eliminate mystery, it brings it closer. The unknown is no longer projected onto a distant exterior, but becomes part of the very experience of existing within a vast, dynamic, and only partially understood universe. Curiosity does not fade, it deepens. And it is with this sense of belonging, rather than closure, that the journey approaches its final moment. A moment where reflection no longer seeks definitive answers, but begins to embrace the question itself as an essential part of the human experience within the cosmos. As the reflection reaches its final stage, the initial question no longer carries the same weight it once did at the beginning of the journey. It has not disappeared, nor has it been answered in a direct way. Instead, it has been transformed. The idea of an outside of the universe is no longer a problem to be solved, but an invitation to reflect on how human thought relates to the totality of existence. The universe, understood as the inseparable union of space, time, and everything that unfolds within them, does not require an exterior in order to be complete. It does not depend on a larger setting, nor on a boundary that encloses it within something else. Its complexity, its history, and its transformations are already enough to sustain the quiet sense of wonder that accompanies scientific inquiry. The fascination lies not in what might exist beyond, but in the depth of what already exists within. This understanding brings with it a subtle shift in posture. Instead of searching for final boundaries, thought learns to value internal paths. Each refined concept, each recognized limit, each carefully reformulated question increases the clarity with which the universe can be approached. Knowledge ceases to be a race toward absolute answers and becomes a continuous process of approximation. There is a particular beauty in accepting that not every question requires a definitive closure. Some questions exist to accompany thought, to keep it in motion, to remind it of its own origins. The question of an outside of the universe fulfills this role with quiet precision. It points to the limits of language, to the strength of everyday intuition, and to the need to revisit those intuitions when our gaze turns toward the cosmos. In this sense, not knowing everything is not a failure, it is a condition. Science grows precisely because it recognizes this condition and works from within it. Each answer reached reveals new layers of the unknown, not as an abyss, but as a shifting horizon. The universe remains open, not because it has a hidden exterior, but because it is too vast to be exhausted by any single description. As this becomes clear, curiosity finds a calmer rhythm. It no longer demands grand images or scenarios beyond the whole. It becomes content to deepen the understanding of what it means to exist in a universe where space and time are not containers, but fundamental aspects of reality, where every attempt to understand is, at the same time, an act of belonging. And so, the initial question can remain with us, not as a source of unease, but as a quiet companion. Not to be answered, but to remind us that the universe does not need an outside to be infinite in meaning, and that the human effort to understand it is one of the most subtle and profound expressions of that very reality. Thank you for spending this time with Cosmos for Rest. If this reflection brought a new sense of perspective, consider sharing it with someone who appreciates calm, thoughtful explorations of the universe. And if you would like to continue these journeys, you are always welcome here, where science unfolds gently, one question at a time.